Let's talk.
Giles Brown.
The Irish in the Italian campaign, 1943 to 1945, men and women of Ireland in one of the Second World War's toughest theatres, is the new book by a man described as Ireland's foremost military history author, with over 30 published works to his credit. Delighted to say that he joins me live on the line now. Richard, good morning to you.
Good morning.
Good, loud and clear. Now then, for those who don't, let's set this in a historical perspective then. So explain how the Irish were fighting, because obviously for a lot of people they will view the Ireland as being neutral during the Second World War. So why were the Irish units serving in the British Army at this point?
Well, there always have been Irish units serving in the British Army. And of course, while what is today the Republic of Ireland was neutral, Northern Ireland is an integral part of the United Kingdom. And of course, you have Irish immigrants across the world. You had Canadians serving in Italy, Irishmen in the Canadian forces, US Army in Italy, Irishmen in the American forces. You had Irishmen in the Indian Army. You had Irishmen literally in almost every army in the world worth talking about.
Because this sort of, you can. The Irish have been fighting a war around the world ever since the wild geese, haven't they? Basically,
they have indeed. That's very true. That's over 300 years.
So why particularly in this campaign? Because a lot of people unjustly, and I have had a revelation over the past 5 years, a lot of it perhaps down to James Holland's book, The Savage Storm, but on the importance that the Italian campaign has, the invasion of Sicily, and then Anzio, and the incredibly tough push up towards Naples and up towards Rome.
Yeah, Italy became a forgotten theatre after the Normandy landings.
Yeah.
But it was a critical theatre in it that it tied down a huge number of German divisions and a huge German effort. The Allied effort in Italy, for example, destroyed the German Air Force in the Mediterranean. It negated almost completely the German naval forces in the Mediterranean. And it fought the German armies, not just to a standstill, but it pushed them back and back and back again.
And not only that, of course, it gets the Italians to do a deal to surrender to the Allies, which doesn't work out particularly well for the Italians in the end. But it ties up a huge amount of men and machinery in that campaign, and the Germans find themselves fighting basically on at least three fronts in Europe, but with Barbarossa against the Soviets as well.
Exactly. I mean, the Germans are so spread out that it's impossible, and yet they still manage to move troops, for example, from Norway down to Italy in the winter of 44-45. They're trying to do the impossible. They're using every trick that they can find in the book, and some that aren't in the book, some that they created at the time. And they know they're fighting a losing battle. But they keep on fighting.
Yeah, indeed. And of course, you've got Kessering, haven't you, who's running the German forces. And he's very much of the Hitlerian mindset that every inch should be fought after, whilst, Rommel, if he was running the show, would say, look, we need to retreat. What they should have done is gone back to, the Alps and held them off there and made it very, very difficult. But of course, they don't, Richard.
They don't. That's true. Rommel's idea when he was in charge, or one of the two Germans in charge in Italy, was that the stop line would be across the peninsula between Pisa and Rimini.
Yeah.
Of course, as you say, Kesselring got his way with Hitler because he sensed the fact that he knew that Hitler didn't like giving up ground, so he decided that he would propose stop lines south of Rome, between Naples and Rome, and that's what happened, and that's what led to the great hard slog right up the Italian peninsula.
Yeah, now it is. Let's talk about the units themselves, because we're talking about are these particular units coming from Ulster, from Northern Ireland? What are they? Because we have the whole Irish diaspora, of course, who are going to get involved. But let's kick off, if we can, with specific units. So where did you research them? How do you find them, and where are they?
Well, I've been researching them for basically a lifetime. My father was one of those who served in Italy. My two next door neighbours growing up, we're going back 70 years, served in Italy. One of them actually had an Italian wife to prove that he'd been in Italy. So those men, my father and one neighbour, were in the Royal Artillery. The other neighbour, who had married the Italian lady, was in the Royal Corps of Signals. You had the Irish infantry regiments, which were represented in Italy. You had the Royal Irish Fusiliers. My father had actually been a Royal Irish Fusilier before the war. The Royal Enniskilling Fusiliers and the Royal Ulster Rifles, who were represented in Italy by their two Territorial Army battalions, the London Irish Rifles. In addition to that, you had an Irish Cavalry Regiment, the North Irish Horse, which was a supplementary reserve regiment that served in Italy with Churchill tanks from about April, May 1944 onwards. You had Irishmen in the Royal Artillery in various units. For example, an Irish commander of the Highland Field Regiment, who had earned a DSO at El Alamein, and another in the Sicilian campaign. And you had Irishmen here, there, and everywhere. And no matter what regiment you looked at, for example, the Royal Sussex seemed to be a popular regiment for an awful lot of Irishmen to join when they'd gone across to England from neutral Ireland in order to take part in the Second World War, the crusade against fascism.
And let's not forget, of course, that though those may be thinking they're quintessential Englishmen, you know, Monty, General Alexander, and also Cunningham are Irishmen as well, aren't they?
They are indeed. Cunningham was born in Rathmines in Dublin. Montgomery's family home is about 18 miles from where I'm sitting. The original Alexander family home is about 3 miles from where I'm sitting talking to you now. So we have that great tradition. And Richard McCreary, who's the final commander of 8th Army, his family came from County Tyrone, where my family roots are also embedded.
The connection is very strong. It's interesting what you mentioned about the infantry units, and also the artillery units, because when you think of the terrain they're fighting on, it is incredibly difficult for mechanized units, because there isn't the sweeping sort of plains, if you like, of obviously going east, nor are there the road systems that you have across the Low Countries. This is terrain that is mountainous, that has woods, but also has twisty, windy roads that are perfect for ambush. So this is an infantryman's, it's the poor bloody infantry again, isn't it, Richard, who are having to do with mules at several points to get kit and caboodle up there.
It is very, very much a country that requires a lot of infantry, and that's shown by the fact that after May 1944, after the casino battles, every armoured division that's deployed by the British Army and the Commonwealth armies in Italy is given a second infantry brigade. The normal composition of an armoured division was one armoured brigade and one infantry brigade. In Italy, they get two infantry brigades because that's just how difficult that country is.
And also, of course, the artillery. You mentioned the HRC, great regiment, but because several points, it gets to the point where if they see a small Italian village, and it's really bad for the small Italian villages on the route, they just pound it, because they just can't be. Here's a technical. I'm asked to sort of do. They want to bomb or pound it as much as they can, and then send in the infantry, hoping that it will have mucked up the Germans. But of course, the rubble is a perfect place to hide, and you get some of the most intense street fighting of the entire war happening in the Italian campaign.
You do. The two classic cases, of course, in late 1943, just round about Christmas, are Sonia and Ortona on the coast. Sonia with the New Zealanders and Ortona with the Canadians. And the Canadians literally wrote the book on fighting in built-up areas. And that book, with various modifications, is still used by armies, particularly in the Commonwealth, to this day.
And of course, you don't. No army can do anything like logistics without support services. Be it Reme, be it the drivers, the engineers. Obviously, in this one, because the bridges have to be built on sometimes under fire, and also there are nurses. And again, there's a huge amount of Irish influence in those, if you like, the logistics services.
There is indeed. We have Irishmen decorated in the Royal Engineers for basically carrying out work that would, in a sense, get you committed to a mental hospital for even thinking of doing it.
Is this Lugano? Is this the crossing the Lugano? Is it that sort of thing?
Yeah. Exactly. And some of the ideas that they came up with. I mean, I did a battlefield study some years ago with a group largely of infantrymen from an infantry regiment, one sapper with them. We were up in the very north, the final campaign, and one posed the question to me, how did the engineers do this? And I said, well, what you've got to remember is that these engineers had been studying in the hardest university possible, the whole way up from the toe of Italy, right up to the north of Italy. By the time they got to northern Italy, they were on the top of their game. They were absolutely superb.
One of the things I remember my grandfather, who was an RSM in the Royal Engineers, is on his wall in his living room, he had that picture of bridging the Lugano under fire, that very famous painting, which he always painted, yes, which he always pointed to very proudly indeed. There's Irish involvement of that, obviously, with the Royal Engineers and the supporting troops.
There was indeed. There was an Irish sergeant in the Royal Army Service Corps, for example, who was responsible for a bridging platoon, the guys who brought up the parts for the Bailey Bridge. And he simply carried on with his work, inspired his platoon to carry on with their work, and got the military medal. Another Irish major in the Royal Engineers was awarded the Military Cross. And you have one of the first tanks that crossed over that bridge was commanded by an Irishman whose service in North Africa had brought him a Military Cross, and whose service in Italy brought him a second Military Cross, a bar to his Military Cross. And when you look at the guy's record, you find that way back there he had an ancestor who fought with Wellington at Waterloo.
Another great Irishman, of course, Wellington.
Yeah, exactly. He was indeed.
So, I mean, you mentioned Monte Cassino a little bit earlier. I mean, brutal in the extreme. Again, and you have... I mean, we can talk strategic and we can talk tactical, but it is, when you get down to, when you read the individual stories of people who are on the ground, it is an incredible slog. And Cassino has held out and held out and held out, and there are all sorts of dramas taking place there. Where did you find the original stories that make up a lot of this book? These individual tales of heroism, of sacrifice, and also the sure sort of slogging on that goes, which is the soldier's lot.
I think I have to say I had the privilege, and there's no other word for it, of knowing a very large number of men who had served in the Italian campaign. And working on military history over the last 40 years or more, I've made it a point of trying to find veterans, talk to veterans, get them to write down their memories. They don't always want to talk. They didn't always want to talk. But I've one very, very strong memory of talking to a group one night who had served with my father. And one of them looked across the table at me and he said, "Do you remember the first time we were up at Barani?" And it suddenly dawned on me, because I've never been to City Barani in my life. He wasn't talking to me. He was talking to my father, who had been there. And I realized that the entire group weren't talking to me. They were talking to one of their friends who'd been there. And I think I got more out of them than I would ever have done had I been, for example, a TV or a newspaper reporter coming in to talk to them about their experiences of the war. So the fact that I could talk in a sense with some knowledge very, very little, as it really is in the great scheme of things, meant that you got information from soldiers who wouldn't have talked otherwise.
And the Italian campaign is marked by several things. We could go about the Gothic line, we could go about Anza, we could talk about we all talk about bridge crossing, but there's a third player in the Italian campaign, and that is the weather, because the winter is that winter. Is it the winter of 44, which is the worst winter that the Europe's had for a very long time, and they're stuck in it and they're fighting, and it is. People talk about hell on earth, but it really is purgatory for them.
Yeah, both winters were bad, but that winter of 44, 45 is probably one of the worst recorded in Europe up to that time. And in one particular instance, the Royal Irish Fusiliers were in the mountains in the Central Apennines. They had the misfortune, as did their entire division and their corps, to be under American command, which was not good. And they were exposed on mountain tops. And I remember talking to a chap who'd been a young officer with them, and he sent me copious notes about his experiences. And his son later became a lieutenant general, and I know the son quite well. And Jim had never told his family what he had told me. So when I sent the notes to the family, they had a real eye opener. But it's those difficulties. How do you cope when you're living in a ditch or a slit trench high on an Apennine mountainside? It's freezing cold. It's pouring with rain. The Germans are trying to kill you while you and the Germans are trying to survive the weather. And it's something we just don't appreciate. He told me about things like, for example, and this makes me smile every time today I see a British soldier wearing a beard. They shaved every day. Yeah. And it's the ability to be able to shave even in freezing cold water gave you a sense of freshness that you couldn't get otherwise. And that's how they survived. It was little things that made life easier. And of course, because the first winter had been bad, the logistics backup was much, much better for the second winter. So they had proper winter clothing by 44, 45, string vests and so forth were the order of the day.
Luxury. Yeah. But also, if you look at who they're fighting as well, two things as well. Fallschirmjäger. I mean, these are the German parachute. Now, they're not the Fallschirmjäger of 1939, 1940, but they still know their way around. So they're not fighting, Hitler Youth or something. They're fighting there are some old hands who are holed up and they are told, the Germans, that they're going to be, if they give an inch, the Allies will be through and into Germany and doing unspeakable things to their womenfolk before Christmas.
Exactly. The Fallschirmjäger were, as Field Marshal Alexander commented, probably the best soldiers Germany had. Yeah. They were dedicated. They were tough. They weren't brutes in the sense that the SS were brutes. And there was a sense to a large extent that they appreciated the quality of the soldiers they fought against and therefore were quite fair. The famous story of Spike Milligan and Hans Teske is a great one, and I'm privileged to have known Hans Teske. I'm also privileged to have a lovely letter from Spike Milligan.
Oh, right. Tell us more. Tell us more.
Spike was not in Italy, but in Tunisia. Yeah. Spike was sent up to recover a tractor, a carrier, Bren gun carrier, basically, when his regiment was withdrawing. So he got to the Bren gun carrier, he climbed into it, he saw these soldiers in the distance wearing what he assumed were American helmets, and as he climbed into the driver's seat of the carrier, he waved to the Americans and shouted to them, "Don't shoot, I'm British." Now, it really wouldn't have mattered because the Americans probably would have shot at him anyway, but these guys blazed away and he suddenly realized they were Fallschirmjäger. And many, many years later, when he published his first book, he got a letter from Hans Teska, who was one of those men who had opened fire. And that began a friendship that lasted for years. And Hans got me out to Germany to a Fallschirmjäger reunion in 1990, and I got to meet some of those guys, and they were absolutely fantastic. They were marvelous human beings, and with a very, very wry sense of humor. Because when Spike got the letter from Hans, he invited Hans for lunch. And in the course of lunch, Spike handed the menu to Hans, and he said, "Hans, could you sign the menu for me?" And Hans signed the menu and said, "Dear Spike, sorry I missed you in 1943. So that's the type of rapport that they had post-war. Yeah. They could meet together, they could talk together. It made you realize the absolute folly of war and the folly of the political fools that got their countries into war.
Isn't there a story as well? I mean, I know it's the African campaign, but Milligan meets Harry Seacombe, doesn't he? Because doesn't is it something like a field gun falls off a cliff or something? Or there's something.
They were both gunners. Spike was in a heavy regiment with 7.2-inch howitzers, and a gun ran away and dropped down a slope into the area where Milligan's, or where Harry Seacombe's field regiment was encamped. Milligan came to the edge of the slope and shouted down, "Have you seen a gun?" And Milligan and Seacombe shouted up, "What colour?" And again, that began a friendship that lasted, and it gave us the Goon Show, for example.
Indeed. Indeed. One of the things as well is, though, because the difference between the Northern European campaigns and this campaign as well is the terrain. And we talked about the villages, but a lot of, especially places like Casino, it's fought on hills that have very little cover, and it's also fought on ground that is very high and stony. And a lot of the casualties will come from, we don't mention artillery, but from mortars. And the fact that if a mortar comes close to you, not only will the shell throw shrapnel everywhere, but it will show sharp bits of small rock, which are just as painful, stroke deadly, as the shrapnel itself.
It was, and in fact, there were at least one hospital, if not one and part of another hospital, were turned over entirely during the period that the campaign was raging around the Casino area to head and eye injuries. And that's really, as you say, that's the explosive landing on rock, splintering the rock, sending small splinters of rock here, there, and everywhere. One of the things I picked up many years ago on the top of one of the mountains around Casino was a piece of shrapnel. And it's round about the size of a 50-pence piece. And it had obviously been lying there at that stage for about 60 years. So it now sits as a sort of small paperweight on my desk.
When you go on these tours, and having written this book, I mean, do you feel... I'm not going to get all deep and meaningful on you here, Richard, but, you know, the sacrifice, the men, the Irish men that were there, is it still very much a tangible, almost taste in the air?
It actually is. It's quite hard to explain, but there's a sense of walking over that ground that you're not quite connecting, but you're appreciating what men who walked over that ground in very, very different circumstances, a lifetime ago now, what we're doing and we're achieving. And when you go into the cemeteries, the Commonwealth Cemetery at Casino, the German cemetery at Kyra Village just up the road, the Polish cemetery in the shadow of the monastery, you really do get a sense of what that really meant. And you get almost a feeling of comradeship with the people who are in those cemeteries and are still there so many years afterwards.
What are you hoping that people will learn? I mean, now, thank goodness, we're rediscovering the Italian campaign. Is it also to rediscover the sacrifice made by the men and women of Ireland in the campaign?
I think, yes, I've been trying for years to make people appreciate how much the Irish did in the Second World War, and particularly in the Italian campaign. It's hard to get the message across, but one thing that I discovered while researching this book, that there were about 20,000 Irish in Italy. That's most of them in the army, around about 17,000 in the army. The remainder in the Royal Air Force and in the Royal Navy. And some of them were, of course, nurses. Some of them wrens, working in backroom jobs, as it were, but still playing an important part in the war and sensing the fact that they were there, making a difference, making things happen, and helping the men who were actually in the front line.
The book is called The Irish in the Italian Campaign, 1943 to 1945. It's by Richard Doherty, who's speaking to today. Richard, is there a website? Can people find you online?
They can't find me online, but they can find the book online with pen and sword. As you've gathered earlier on, I'm not too good with computers.
We get there in the end. You can order it by our own virtual bookstore. The book is called The Irish in the Italian Campaign. It's by Richard Doherty. Richard, it's been an absolute honour to speak to you this morning.
Pleasure, Giles. Thank you very much indeed.